Hello, my name is Sam Miller, and today I will be presenting for my IISA 4220 course, and specifically talking about securing email services using POP3S and SMTPS. We'll cover what these protocols are and how they are configured on Linux and Windows, and the critical hardening measures needed to protect them from misuse or any security vulnerabilities. So let's cover the agenda of what's going to be talked about today. We'll begin with POP3S, what it is, how to configure it with Dovecot, how to harden it, and then we are going to move on to SMTPS, looking at both Linux, postfix, and Windows IIS setups, followed by hardening recommendations. And finally, we are going to wrap up with some summary and references of what was used in the context of research. So, some of the most important communication that we are going to do in the business world or personal life is mostly going to be done over email. We all use it, university, work, for receipts, sending important documentations to ourselves, and we're going to want to make sure that that is secure. We don't want to be running any insecure protocols that can risk credential theft and data compromise. But there are insecure protocols like POP3 and SMTP that do plain text when they are sending data or information, and that can create a serious risk, which again leads to credential theft, data compromise, and that's where secure versions come in, like POP3S for receiving and SMTPS for sending. Both use TLS to mitigate these risks. The objective of our lab is to configure these protocols so that they securely listen on their default ports for validation. So as an overview for POP3S, it stands for Post Office Protocol 3 Secure, and it is going to run on port 995 for its secure port. Now make sure you remember that. That's very important. It means that encryption is required from the start of the connection. It allows clients to securely retrieve the mail while protecting credentials and messages contents from interception. So on the right-hand side, I supplied a graph that I got from a security blog called JScape, which was discussing the differences between SMTP, POP3, and IMAP. And here we can see that it's pulling from the mail server for your personal computer. So it's receiving the mail, and you want to make sure that the mail that you are receiving, is secure as it can be. You don't want to be putting anything that can provide a risk to your operating system. And that is where POP3S comes into play. It's pretty simple and lightweight, so it's low memory. While it does have fewer features compared to IMAP, like limited folder management and no robust server-side search, it's pretty secure. It's pretty easy to set up from a user perspective. Let's talk a little bit on how we are going to set it up and how we are, going to configure a little bit more. So we are going to use Dovecot for this. So what is Dovecot? It is a high-performing mail delivery agent. It's secure and lightweight, and after installation, we can configure the mail directory for it. So again, don't worry about the installation for this. It requires very little memory. It's just a focus on security for your POP3S. And here I supplied the following commands of what that would look like to install it on your server. So sudo apt install dovecot imapt dovecot pop3d. And then we are going to make sure that we've enabled user privileges and importantly enforce SSL TLS, making sure that everything sent is encrypted. So we're going to do this by disabling plain text authentication, requiring TLS, and we reduce vulnerabilities from downgrade attacks or plain text credential leaks. The service is then restarted and validated with tools like Nmap or OpenSSL. So here are some hardening recommendations. I have listed 3 to what to do for POP3S. So 3 main measures specifically. So first of all, we are going to, which we've mentioned before, Disable plain text authentication. This ensures that logins can only occur over TLS, making sure that everything is as encrypted as it can be. Again, I have supplied the command line for it at the bottom of what is to be used on the server. And then second of all, we are going to enforce modern TLS protocols, strong ciphers, for example. So like using TLS 1.2 or higher, we don't want to be using any weak protocols that are open for any security vulnerabilities. And then third of all, while it might seem a little intuitive, we're going to do regular patches and update the software. So, closing any vulnerabilities as they are discovered. These measures significantly reduce exposure to credential theft and downgrade attacks. We want to make sure that everything we're running is up to date, and when we supply a patch or do an upgrade, we want to make sure that it's up to date before we do that, and making sure that, we don't have any bugs or patches that we need to worry about. So now let's do an overview of SMTPS. SMTPS stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, secure. It runs on port 465 using implicit TLS, ensuring that the session is encrypted from the start. Again, this is kind of a repeating factor that we're going to see. We want to make sure that the ports are secure. We don't want to be running anything plain text that can be easily intercepted. It's used by clients to send mail and by servers to forward them. So as we can see on the right-hand side of the presentation, another graph I pulled from the security blog Jscape, it's showing where SMTP is into play. We want to make sure that that's secure when we're sending it from server to server, making sure nothing is intercepted as much as possible. And through that, we are complying with confidentiality and integrity. So let's talk about how we are going to configure this with Linux. On Linux, Postfix is the go-to mail transfer agent for this. It's highly flexible, simple. It's known for its high speed and strong security features, which seems to be a correlating thing with Linux, with the open source materials that they provide. So how are we going to configure this? So again, there are following commands that I have supplied. We are going to make sure that we installed Postfix with sudo apt update, making sure everything is up to date, and then installing Postfix with sudo apt install Postfix. Then we're going to configure master CF file to listen on port 465, the secure port, and enable wrapper mode with TLS. In the main file of the main.cf file, we are going to specify certifications that we want, enforce TLS only authentication, restrict relay access, and finally, we're going to restart the service and confirm that the port 465 is listening securely. We can do this through nmap Kali scan to make sure that that port is actively running, that it's open. And this ensures that emails are only submitted over these encrypted connections. So here are some listed postfix hardening. So first of all, we are going to enforce the TLS protocol in Cypher. Like we mentioned before, we're going to reject outdated SSL versions. Second of all, we are going to require authentication before relaying, preventing any open relay abuse. Only authenticated users or trusted networks can send emails through this ran command. We're going to make sure that we are going to prevent any spam as much as possible. And then third of all, we are going to do rate limiting the number of connections or messages to defend against. So that would be spam floods, brute force attacks, or DDoS attacks. So as you can see, I have supplied some rate limits. So for SMTPD, I've given the client connection a count limit of 20 and a message rate of 100. And as you can see, a connection rate limit of 10. You can adjust these to how you see fit. Again, for this is just for a virtual machine lab. So I think that this is appropriate for what I want for making it as secure as possible. However, if you think that your application requires a little more or maybe sometimes less, you can adjust that. So now let's talk about how we are going to configure this with Windows. On Windows, we use IIS SMTP, and we can enable this server through IIS 6.0 Management Console. It says to install it here when it listed under configuration. Again, that's if you don't have it, but for this server, we do have it already built into the virtual machine. And then we are going to secure this. We're going to secure it by assigning a TLS certificate, enforcing TLS for authentication, and then bind that service to port 465, which is the secure port. And then IIS logging can be enabled for visibility. The outcome is that the SMTP submissions are secure with TLS and prevent any plaintext authentication or unauthorized use. For IIS SMTP, the hardening involves, first of all, requiring TLS encryption for all communications. Again, that is going to be the basis of this presentation that you are going to keep hearing, of making sure that everything is TLS encrypted all the way through from start to end. Second of all, we're going to restrict relay permissions, ensuring only authenticated users or trusted internal IPs can send mail, and prevent spam relay through making sure that this is configured properly. We don't want our server to become an open relay for spammers at all. That's not good. And then third of all, we are going to enable logging and monitoring, allowing us to detect brute force attempts, unauthorized relays, and abnormal traffic patterns. These controls can help significantly improve the resilience of our Windows mail service. Again, Windows operating systems are more susceptible to attacks because it's probably one of the most popular enterprise-grade operating systems. So we want to make sure everything is locked down as much as possible. So in summary, because I know I spoke a lot about a lot of different technical stuff in configuring and hardening recommendations, so let me boil that into some key points. POP3S is going to be on port 995 for security reasons for the retrieval of emails. SMTPS is going to be on port 465 and secure the submission of outgoing mail. Both are replacing their insecure counterparts like port 110 and 25. And then the hardening recommendation measures across Dovecot, Postfix, and IIS include enforcing TLS, disabling outdated protocols, mitigating open relay, firewall restrictions, and enable logging. So the bottom line of this is, why does this matter? Why are we putting in all this effort for, just a seemingly simple application like email? So the bottom line is that these steps protect user data, prevent man-in-the-middle attacks, spoofing, reduce the risk of spam and malware, and helps align us with modern compliance standards. Again, it's just getting us more familiar with the lay of the land of what is to be expected. Some of it might be a little overkill, depending on what you might see that as. And it's about keeping a healthy balance of making sure nothing is, quote unquote, too secure. Again, we want the user to use the operating system. We don't want it to be completely locked down or a miserable experience. So there has to be a delicate balance of what we are willing to risk and what we are not. But for the sake of this lab, we are completely locking down everything as much as we can. So here are some of the references I used. Here I have listed some of the security blogs: Microsoft, Red Hat, Ubuntu, Linux Journal. They have backed up the configuration and hardening steps that I have outlined today, and can serve as a resource for further detail if you so wish to look upon that. And here we have the part 2 of that. Again, a lot of resources. So for further detail, we can look at Red Hat, Ubuntu, Postfix, and a few of some more personal security blogs. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and I look forward to presenting again.